On this episode of the Comic Book Kaiju, I have the esteemed pleasure of Mr. Uncanny Omar from NearMintCondition, the home of collected editions. I want to say, if you guys are into graphic novels, especially like absolute omnibuses, like the big chunky boys, the channel that you want to be checking out is NearMintCondition. They have a positive, honest community, and there's a ton of great stuff over there with the Minties. They will always be in near mint condition. Omar, thank you very much for joining me today.
Hey, man, dude, thank you for inviting me on and for promoting my channel a lot better than I do. I kind of forget so many of the things. My wife has to remind me what we are, and I'm like, oh, that's right. Yeah, I should probably say that.
Well,
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was really happy to find your channel on YouTube. Just kind of scrolling through the feeds and looking for stuff, and yours popped out specifically just the aesthetic of it, the look and design and everything. And I'm just very pleased to come across, because collected editions are something specifically that they're a different beast rather than
Oh, yeah.
collecting single issues, and even with digital collections
Mhm.
and stuff like that. But having those on your bookshelf, like there's nothing finer than seeing a nice collected edition on a shelf. So I actually wanted to ask you, before I ask you about near mint condition and about the
Mhm.
collected editions, what is your comic book origin story? Kind of how did you get into comics? What hooked you, and what kind of made you a fan for life?
Oh, so I think like most comic book collectors or readers my age, I'm 44. I'll be 45 here in a couple of months, but most of us have an origin story that starts at childhood, and then we kind of broke up with comics
Yes.
in high school and
Yep.
maybe college. Then we came back. So for me, I was at the age of 7 in Peru. I had, or no, 6. I had appendicitis, so I was taken to a children's clinic, and they kept me there for about 5, 6 days to keep an eye on me because my it had burst, and so I
Ooh,
was there. My uncle sent a care package of like comic books, and I
nice.
lived in Peru, and we spoke and only read in Spanish, so it was really cool to get these American comics. Uh, my favorite one that I would keep looking over and over was Uncanny X-Men 168.
Oh,
And
nice.
so that's, to me, that will always be my first comic book. And
Nice.
because that's like from the ashes, the beginning of that storyline. It's Kitty Pryde and Lockheed's first appearance, also first appearance of Madeline Pryor. So it means a lot to me. And then when we moved to America in '87, I started collecting them, seeing them at the grocery. Back then, I mean, it's different now, but back then, pharmacies, Walmart, Kroger, wherever you shopped, had comics everywhere. It was so
Yeah,
cool because it was
I
like,
miss those.
and they were at eye level with the kids. People were smart. They were down here. Magazines were up here, comics were down there. I'd ask my mom and dad to get some because I remember getting them in Peru, and that's all she wrote. And I started with, I stayed with X Men forever. I mean, X Men. Like I started. We didn't have a comic book store either in my hometown where I live because it's a small town. So I had to travel. Oh my gosh, I remember finding the first comic book store. Um, I think it was like an hour from here. And before that, I would go to this place called Doctor Comics, which was in the flea market.
Ooh.
Flea markets was open market where anything goes, and that was a pretty cool place because that guy, Doctor Comics, had like 10-cent comics and he had quarter comics,
Oh,
and
nice.
I don't think he had a PhD. I don't think that was real, but he had a lot of he had a lot of good deals. So
Nice.
I started getting a lot of back issues, starting building my runs as we called them.
Mm.
By the time I got into high school, yeah, making my own money and finishing out my runs. I mean, I had X Men. I had X Men all the way up to like, when was that? I want to say like 325, 330, like a complete run. And then this thing happened called Onslaught.
Ooh.
Onslaught Marvel Universe, and I think by that point I always blame Onslaught like as the storyline that made me leave comics, but it was probably me not outgrowing the genre, but kind of finding other things like I needed money for dates, or like cars, or like
Yes.
my car needed gas, and leaving comics behind. And I left them behind for a while. And it wasn't until 2002 that I came back. So that was like 1996. So I was broken up with comics, for about 6 years or so. And in 2002, I was going through some personal things. I ended up getting divorced from the lady I was married to, and it was almost like coming back home. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, dude, you got to check out X-Men." I'm like, "How you checking out X-Men, dude? X-Men. I'm done. I'm out. I'm broke up with X-Men. I don't need X-Men." And he was like, "Oh man, but Grant Morrison's writing X-Men." I remember Grant Morrison writing Animal Man. He knew I loved Grant Morrison and the run on Animal Man.
Nice.
So I was like, "Oh, well, that might be interesting." So you should lend me some comics. What was it? E for Extinction, and I was like, "Okay." Well, then I started going to the comic book store, and in the comic book store, so this is 2002. This is when they started marketing these trade paperbacks more and more. And back in our day when we were younger, we had trades, right? We had some graphic novels, but it wasn't everything. It was like Dark Phoenix Saga, From the Ashes, Watchmen, Batman Year One, Dark Knight Returns. That's it. It wasn't like, oh, you're looking for Excalibur issue number 45. Well, that's collected in this omnibus. You can go get that. No, like, I always say kids these days, but people these days that are collected editions, I had no idea what it was like. And that's only 21 years ago.
Yeah.
And then I started noticing a trend, 2003, like bookstores were changing the way that they were marketing comics because they saw a big manga boom. So instead of trades or collected editions, the term changed to graphic novels. And back, when we were younger, graphic novels were original comics that were released in a hardcover or a trade paperback format, kind of like in the European style.
Right.
And then Astonishing X-Men dropped, and that's when I was like, well, I guess that's it for me. I'm staying.
Nice.
This is it, because Astonishing X-Men was like a throwback to those glory days of Claremont's run, and I was like, oh, this is so good. Every issue, I loved it. And I've been with that. I've been back with comics since 2002, 2003.
Nice.
And I've been getting collected editions since 2002.
So for you, let's see, I'm trying to run the timeline in my mind. The 90s X-Men animated show, did that have any impact on you? And then the 2000 Bryan Singer X-Men movies, did those formats have any kind of hold on you, or was it just comics the whole way?
Well, for me, it was comics, right? So comics were my thing. But the cool thing about the animated show, I was in high school when that was coming out. And some friends of mine were like, dude, you watching X-Men? And I was like, yeah, it's pretty good. They're like, oh, man, it's fun. And I'm like, you ought to read the comic. Ooh. So, that was a good segue for me to, introduce some friends. So I got my buddy Matt into it. I got my buddy Andrew. Dan was already getting stuff, like my buddy Chris. Like, it was really cool to, buy comics. And they were like, oh, it's Wolverine or it's Gambit. The movies were kind of the same way. When the X-Men movie dropped, I was like, man, that dude's too tall to be Wolverine. I'm not Wolverine. But, Hugh Jackman killed it. And I thought it was a good movie. I genuinely thought it was a good movie. I thought, there's a lot of cool moments in X-Men that I thought, oh, Singer actually gets it. He gets what X-Men's about. And again, this time around, though, it wasn't just dude friends. There were lady friends that were like, oh, that's pretty cool. I'd like to check that out. And by that point, we had a little more graphic novels, not what we have now, but we had a little more back in 2000, 2001. So I went to a comic shop, even though I wasn't getting anything for me. I was asking them, like, hey, do you have this storyline collected? Like, God Loves, Man Kills, which is my favorite X-Men story.
Yes.
They were like, yeah, they have a little trade paperback of that now instead of the graphic novel that it originally came in. So yeah, in that way, they did impact getting the word out there, spreading the word out there of comics to my friends and family. And you can ask any of them to this day. I still, for Christmas or birthdays, that's what they get. They may not ever read them or crack them open. But that's perfect. Where I get them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Actually, wanted to go back real quick to your original comics that you got when you were kind of laid out in the hospital. Mm-hmm. So those were in English, and you said you were just speaking Spanish at that point?
Yeah. So it's a good thing it's a visual media, right?
Yes.
I just looking at pictures.
Yeah.
But I will say this. When I came to America, I also did not speak English. And part of me learning English was that summer of 1987, going home and reading like comic books because
Yes,
it's
yes.
difficult for a kid that age. We didn't have phones and be like, hey man, translate this.
Right, right.
We didn't have the internet. It was just like you're thrown in the middle of all these kids that speak English, and I was thrown into a Catholic school
Oh.
because we were from a third world country. It's
Mhm.
just took us in. I got into a lot of fights, man, because there were a lot of rich kids there, and I was, I could tell they were making fun of me.
Oh.
I like Wolverine. He's my favorite character for a reason. But it was that magical moment of summer that I remember thinking, I'm going to read these things. I'm going to understand them. And in a weird way, comics really helped me learn the language and how to read. And that's why to
Nice.
this day, like, all the little digest sized books that Marvel sends us, those are all donated to schools. Like,
Oh, nice.
for
Nice.
people that have like whenever we have giveaways on our channel, like I always ask people that have kids and I send them because I think it's a really good way. And they started a program at my daughter's school, like English as a second language, because there's a big like just a lot of kids that speak Spanish that don't speak any English, and I know what that's like. So I started volunteering there, and I would take them, the little digest sized books like the Marvelverse books, or like the reprints of like Spider Gwen and Miles Morales and stuff. So it's really cool because they can follow the pictures and eventually learn some words because it's a memory game, right? Like reading about memorization stuff.
Right.
So although I never did learn to read manga, I wish I could have.
But actually,
apply that to
manga. It's funny you say that because it kind of sparked something in my my comic timeline, I guess. I'm a quarter Japanese. Mm-hmm. My dad was in the Air Force, and we lived in Japan for a little bit, and there were Dragon Ball Z mangas, and this was before they went over to the States, before they got big, before they got translated. So everything was in Japanese. But I loved the art so much. I want to say I was like 7 or 8 at the time. And I loved the art. Like you could not, like, I don't know. It was just like catnip. Like when that artwork hit me, I was like, I gotta, like, what is this? So I would read the mangas, but they were all in Japanese. So I had to make up my own storyline of what was going on. And then when they translated it later, I was in college when they finally translated it, and it was on TV and it was airing. And I was like, this is nothing like the story that I made up. This is completely different. But
my story was better.
Yeah, exactly.
I did the exact same thing with X-Men, with Spider-Man, with some Batman. Yeah, the exact same thing. Like I knew his name was Bruce Wayne. I assume but you're right. That's exactly what I did. I would just kind of make up my own story because I didn't read the language. That's cool though. I love that. I was importing those manga from Japan. I didn't read Dragon Ball Z in Japanese either, but I love Akira Toriyama's art. So we didn't have that. I mean, and that's also the big difference back then. We also had the single issues that Biz was bringing over because we were stuck on that floppies kind of mentality. They were afraid to bring over, the tankobons, the smaller size books of manga, and they were definitely afraid to make it the right to left format.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That didn't start until Tokyo Pop. Even though Tokyo Pop ended up going under, my goodness, they helped the big manga explosion in the early aughts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's a very interesting topic. Maybe I'll discuss it when we have the Uncanny Ken on the next episode. But you mentioned graphic novels. I actually wanted to get your take on that real quick. Just the name graphic novel, because like you said, when we were growing up, those were original stories. They didn't come out in floppies. It was like, okay, graphic novel is a collected story all at once. Now they kind of changed it to where the graphic novel means just a collection for the most part. They have original graphic novels also, but I have felt kind of hot and cold on that term graphic novel because I don't like trying to not dumb down, but trying to make it more appealing because comic book is for kids, or I'm trying to think of another, like cartoon is for kids versus animation, or like the word graphic novel. I guess, does that bother you at all, or do you just like, oh, graphic novel? That's just the term for it.
No, I mean, obviously, I grew up with trade paperback or collected edition or uh, what else did we used to call it something else? A collection, maybe. But I was okay with the change because mainly it brought a lot of people in,
Mm-hmm,
a
mm-hmm.
lot of people that never had had picked up any comic book, a single issue, and had no idea that sometimes these graphic novels were made up of these single issues or
Yeah.
floppies. Like Watchmen, I can't think of like how many of my friends that did not read comics thought, oh, this came out every month, even though there were delays. This came out like every month, really, and it came out in like a little tiny issue, and yeah, because none of them ever read it that way. They've only read it as that trade paperback or graphic novel, and that's it. So I was okay with that. It is definitely a weird change to the older generation for
Mm-hmm.
sure, because that's who comments on my videos the most. They're like, "Why do you keep calling it a graphic novel?" And I'm like, "Man, don't yell at me. Go yell at the bookstores and the
Yeah.
publishers. They're the ones that made the change.
Right.
I'm just trying to make sure I." You go to a
Yeah.
bookstore and you ask where their collected editions are, they're gonna be like, "What's that?
Right.
Wait,
Right.
comic books?"
Yeah. And
If you ask where
I
graphic novels are, there's big signs that say that.
uh-huh. And I worked at a Barnes and Noble for a little bit, and I had this one experience with a lady, and she was like, I want recommendations. And I'm in my mind, I'm like, I'm the comic book guy. Like,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
right, right.
recommend Why the Last Man, all these other things.
Good one.
And I said, have you ever read a graphic novel? She's like, graphic novel? I've never heard this term. What is this? And I took her over to the graphic novel section, and she goes, oh, these are comic books. And like my heart sunk. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't even give it a chance. She was like, all right, I'm going back over to the novels, like the adult section.
Mhm.
So she was just one person that, you weren't going to get through to. But that's kind of in my mind, like I have these horror stories of graphic novel is this marketing term that they want to sugarcoat comic book. Like they want to make people say, oh, this is more adult versus no, just call it a comic. Just call it a comic book. They're adult, things. Everyone can read these. It's not just for kids.
It
But
is a sad and weird like thing to think about when well, you said it. Like I think a lot of people immediately think, "Oh, comic books are for kids." To this day, even within the community, people that only read superhero comics or like crime comics, they look at something like Don Rosa or Carl Barks Duck Comics, and they're like, "No, that's for children." It's that mentality, and it's weird because I always think that it might be a American mentality,
yeah, I think it
because
is.
well, you've lived in Japan, and I knew
Yes.
when my wife and I went there, it was everywhere. Business
Yes.
dudes with business suits were reading manga.
Yes.
Ladies that were out shopping were reading manga. That, oh my gosh, what what I would give to see that like here.
Yeah, I
Closest
wish.
and reading in general, right, dude? Like
Right.
closest thing I've ever seen to that ever was when the last Harry Potter book was
Oh,
released.
yeah.
I was in Chicago, Illinois for work, and everybody on the bus. Nah, I'm sorry, not everybody, but I would say about half the people on the bus, and that's a good number, were reading a book. Like that's just
Yeah.
nice to see, you know. I don't know
Yeah.
how they would be now, maybe on their phones or tablet. I don't know, but it was just that was the only thing that I've seen close to what I saw and I experienced when going overseas to Japan. Like where it's just people don't look, people don't look down on people that are reading manga.
Yeah.
I think we do have that mentality here that, oh, it's comic books for kids, even though the number one, the top 5 movies of all time are all based on comic books.
Yeah. And
Go figure.
I'm sure you get the same joy that I do now, where it's like, these are the properties and franchises I loved as a kid. And more people are getting exposed to them today because of these other formats, these other mediums of movies and TV shows, getting all the Disney Plus stuff, and hopefully we can get DC back on track, but getting all the superhero stuff. And I'm both. I'm into superheroes and non-superhero stuff, but
Mhm.
I just have this joy right now of and I every year I hear people, oh, the superhero craze is over. People are getting
Right.
tired of superheroes. I hear it every year, but I'm just like, more, give me more. Because there's so many avenues that have not been explored with superheroes. Like we've only scratched the surface of what this, this format and this genre holds for everyone. Just a medium of comic books in general is so vast. They've only scratched the surface on these TV shows and movies. But actually, you said something that was very interesting about the Japanese culture. That is 100% correct. Where you'll see men in business suits, women. There's no like gender bias over there. There's no age bias for
Hmm.
comic books, which are manga in Japan, but
Hmm.
also video games. The same way.
Oh yeah.
I would be on the train and you'd see senior citizens with Game Boys, and it's like video games are not just for kids. Same way with manga. They'll be reading manga on the train. I wonder if it's also kind of the public transit. I wonder if that has a lot to do with it, where they just have a lot of more free time as they're commuting.
And I wonder
Maybe
how it is
that's.
now that we have phones, right? I haven't been there since 2008. We're actually planning on going this year.
Oh yeah,
And I'm so curious about that. Like how, yeah, because my wife and I, we went there on our honeymoon, and
Oh,
we,
nice, nice.
we made a promise that we take our kids one day, and we figured they're 13 and 11, she'll be 14 when we go. 14 and 11, I think it's a good time for them to go and
Yes.
see another. They've been to Spain and Italy and France, and now it's time to go see Japan, another culture. So I think it's beautiful, man. Like I wish I had that option when I was a kid, right?
Oh yeah,
Uh,
100%.
but I wonder how that is going to be now compared to when I was there in 2008, right? Are people going to be on their phones? Because it seems like that's what people do, right? You get lost on your phone and you don't want to talk to nobody. You don't know those
Yeah.
people. You're going to get lost. Or are they still getting, the manga and video games? I remember the PSP was huge when I was there. And
Yeah, right.
the DS.
Yeah, I'd be interested too. You got to come back and report on that because I want to know. That's definitely something interesting. Because also another thing was the way that personal computing developed over there. The phones were much more um, popular than the desktops. So, and even I think even laptops. So the phone was like the main computing device in Japan. So
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing. Yeah, I'd be interested because I also have not been back in a few years. I'd like to see more of the current state over in Japan. I haven't seen anything online. Um, but I also wanted to get into how did you get specifically with your channel into collections? How did you make, or what made you want to make that your niche of I'm going to cover these type of books, these type of collections, and put the focus and the spotlight on that.
I wanted to make something that wasn't already there. I wanted to make something that I could have benefited from 20 years ago.
Oh, yes.
Like that, and that's the thing, right? Necessity is the mother of invention and all that. I
Yeah.
remember thinking, okay, and it's weird, man, because it's kind of experimental, right? It's like, okay, I'm gonna try this, see if people like it. Because I started the channel with a group of friends, and it was like a panel show, which is what we used to have a podcast, and it was a lot of fun. But then I wanted to experiment on some things, like because they couldn't always meet, and I'm like, well, I'm kind of bored. I'm gonna take my camera and talk about these books that I like, because I know there is a following. I had no idea how much of a following there was, and I remember doing like an overview of a book, talking about it, and I didn't know how long I should go. I didn't know what exactly to talk about. And then it just kind of became a thing where people were like, kept asking me questions. And some of the best performing videos I ever did were the ones where people were like, hey man, can you do like what was it? The Battle Angel Alita, like hardcover that just came out. And I was like, yeah, I was a big fan of it. And there's a huge difference between this release and the original Viz release. And I can talk about that, sure. And I did. And that became like a huge video. So I started and to this day I still try to interact with my audience. It just makes it really time, man. I just wish we had more time in the day.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I started doing reading orders because I remember reading orders. What confused me when I was getting into this, because with comic books, even comic books get a little bit confusing, right?
Like, 100%,
because of the relaunches and the reboots and starting over with a brand new number one. Let's bring it back a little bit. Oh, this is now we're going to relaunch this. This is issue 30, but next month is going to be another issue number one. So even with comics, it got a little bit confusing. But in my head, I started like putting my trade paperbacks and hardcovers in chronological order. And even okay, the comics are bad enough, but they're not even that bad. You can figure it out sometimes. But the trades were a nightmare.
Ooh.
The trades and hardcovers were a nightmare because there was no volume 1. It was just the name.
Right.
They would give you a title
Yeah.
like Justice League, Tower of Terror,
Right.
or Tower of Babel,
Yeah.
and you're like, okay. There's nowhere in the back that it said what it collected. So in my head, I started building like it's so weird, like a chronological order of what issues are collected where in what hardcover and trade paperback. And because I like reading things in chronological order from the beginning, I have to keep them that way and that way. So then I started making videos on that, and those became really big. Nice. And then the big thing that happened was 2020, man. Like I got 20 years in IT, and I lost my job. I lost my job, and that was in June. And I had the channel. I had the channel since 2016, 2015. But you know, by that point, I had already started talking to Marvel. They were letting me announce things. We built a really good relationship, and it was insane, man. And I feel like this is what happened to a lot of people. Like, we couldn't find anything.
Right.
Like I was 20 years into my career, and once you get to a certain level, it's almost near impossible to find something like that. There's somebody willing to pay you unless you're willing to move, or unless you're willing to take contract work. I have a family, and I'm like, I gotta have more, security than just contract. Can't be flying out somewhere and not have a job the next. So it was bad. By October, it was like, okay, I need to think about, working at Walmart part-time. And there's nothing wrong with it, because no matter what, you're as a parent, you got to do whatever it takes to put food on the table, to keep the lights on. So that's when Marvel approached me about like doing some sponsoring on my channel for like 4 episodes a month. So oh my gosh, that was amazing, because it was amazing in a big roller coaster of working with lawyers and rewriting a contract, because the contract they sent was like a contract they would give like like somebody that's multi-million-dollar company that's making commercials for Disney. And I was like, I can't afford like $1 million insurance policy. Like a dude that makes videos out of his basement,
right?
Like, so it was going back and forth and rewriting. Oh, it was amazing. Not at the time, but it was amazing to get to rewrite that, and it worked out. And then I was looking at the numbers. My subscribers went up a lot because of the pandemic. People were home. People were nostalgic about things. People were just finding about collected editions. So my subscribers went up a lot. So we decided to tweak our Patreon, and I told my wife, we were looking at the numbers and everything, and I was like, if I put everything into this, I think I could do this full time. Nice. And make as much as, a level 2 position that I was at before. Not necessarily where we were, nowhere near, but level 2, I'll take that over level 1 positions. And if I'm going to go back to level 1, start at the beginning of my career, then I might as well take a shot in doing something I love. And it was not an easy decision, dude. It wasn't like, I quit my job, I'm working at YouTube now, man. No, dude, no. It was, I lost my job in June. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Come October, there's nothing. I'm about to go take a level 1 position. I'm looking at numbers. I'm like, I think to come January of 2021, I put a video out that was like, changes to the channel, opening up Patreon slots. And it's been a blessing. It wasn't, it was like, sometimes I always feel like sometimes the universe puts you in a position that you were supposed to be in a long time ago. And that's how it felt. Like they grabbed me out of this, and it sucked, and it was scary. And for anybody that has lost their job, how bad it is, especially when you have kids and you're looking like for the future, and you're like, what do you do? And then you ask yourself, am I making the right decision? Like not going back to my career. That's almost career suicide. You're not going to go back. That is 20 years of work that you've put in, and you're not doing any of that anymore to go and make YouTube videos. You're 40, what was it, 43 at the time, 43-year-old man. What are you thinking, man? That's a young man's game. But I took a chance, and it was a buddy of mine, my buddy Frank. He was like, dude, like, I think he said something that will forever stick with me. He said, look, take a chance, man. Because what's the worst that can happen, right? Worst that can happen is it doesn't work out. And then you go back to being a poor schmuck like the rest of us and working for someone else. But you had that one good year where you did it and you worked, you tried your best, but you had that moment. And now you're just going back to where you used to be. And he's like, that's a wonderful message to send your kids. If you apply yourself and you try real hard, sometimes things like that happens. So I took that. I mean, that one I took to heart. So yeah, come January, this is 2021, 2022. So this is going on to my year 3 of doing this. So
full time. Nice. Yeah. That's actually something that I aspire to. That's kind of my eventual goals. I have a small channel right now, but, actually through shorts is the way that I've gained just this last year alone. It was like went up remarkably from what I was at. So definitely I'm in that same kind of position as you, where I want to take a shot. I want to take a chance of doing something that I'm passionate about and talking about it. And kind of my whole goal with my podcast and show on YouTube is just spreading comics, the joy of reading comics with other people, kind of like you were saying earlier, just like what this can do, kind of show people what comics can do. That's kind of my goal overall. So yeah, I'm very inspired by your journey overall and your channel. Like I said, as far as collections go, as far as collectibles, if you're into graphic novels, if you're into omnibuses, this is the place to be. Near Mint Condition is the channel that you want to be going to, because every time I see a notification pop up and it has your check mark in your logo, I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be great. This is gonna be a new great book he's gonna talk about and show me something that I hadn't seen before. Because like you said, I've seen you breaking news, things that aren't out yet, and collections like that. So at this point, are you exclusive Marvel, or do you talk about DC or Image or any other of those?
Sorry. No, like if I say like this video is sponsored by Marvel, then yeah, that's the exclusivity. Like they give us the breaking news of upcoming projects and upcoming books that are coming out. But no, I do DC. I have connections with Dark Horse and
Nice.
Fantagraphics and Humanoids, and they're wonderful people that I've worked with. DC, I still, I purchase their books and I do overviews of their books. Matter of fact, like tomorrow, I think, on my channel, tomorrow, Thursday. Sorry, I'm trying to think. I film ahead of time and I'm trying to think of where we are. But yeah, no, I don't discriminate. I like all of it. And even when manga tries to take my channel down, I still talk about manga, baby.
Is there any do you have any all-time favorite collection? Like when you look at your shelf, do you say, all right, that one is the one that has the most meaning to me, or even just as a collection, just the way that it's put together, the way that the actual book itself is? Do you have a all-time favorite, number one?
Every year I do list on my channel, and every few months, I'm sorry, it's like top 10 favorite omnibus for people, top 10 favorite DC omnis released last year, upcoming. I have never sat down and thought about like what are my top 10 favorite collected editions. Number one is always going to be Uncanny X-Men Omnibus Volume 1. Like that one's signed by people that are no longer with us, and it's my very first omnibus, and it just has a really, special place in my heart because it's kind of the one that started this madness.
Yeah.
because I remember buying that and I'm like, I'm only gonna get X-Men, and then Spider-Man came out. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get X-Men and Spider-Man, and that's it. That's it. This is where I draw the line. Then they reprinted Fantastic Four because I didn't want to get it at first. I'm like, that book's too big. Ain't nobody paying $100 for no book, dude. They reprinted Fantastic Four release volume 2, and I'm like, okay. I'm only getting X-Men and Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, but that's it. And then Avengers dropped, and then I'm like, dang.
That collecting bug kind of got into you. Yeah, that's
It was
fantastic.
Bad,
There's
bad.
it's been crazy. Like, I haven't specifically sought out X-Men fans, but the majority of the guests that I've had on my show so far have been X-Men fans. It's kind of fascinating to me. A lot of them were the 90s X-Men show. That was what kind of hooked them, got them in, and then they went into comics after that. But it seems like it's just kind of the like a thread that goes through these generations of, and that's probably why X-Men have been so popular. I think they just hit a note in people, and the themes that they touch on, and I like how that they've gone. There's been an evolution of what do mutants stand for, like what do mutants mean as in a metaphor, and I've always found that fascinating. From even when I was younger, I've always been a Spider-Man guy. That's been my number one. Like the way that the way that I relate to other characters are, okay, how does that person? It's like the 6 degrees of separation. It's like, how does Daredevil? Okay, he's Spider-Man's friend. That's how I know him. Okay, Kingpin. Like, everyone is tied to Spider-Man at some point. So to me, that's how my brain works. I was relating everybody to Spider-Man. So it's interesting to see a lot of people like you, where X-Men was like the first one and continues to be the one, as we kind of see now in the current Marvel. Everybody's clamoring for X-Men. Like, everybody wants the mutants. Everybody wants X-Men to be in the current MCU. So I'm also like chomping at the bit to see what's going to come next. Is there something specifically for you that the X-Men, when you look back on it, do you say, oh yeah, that's why I was drawn to the X-Men, or that's why I like the X-Men? Or was it just kind of random because that was the book that you got, as you were in the hospital?
Oh, so my uncle shipped out a couple of books, right? I remember Spider-Man. I can't even remember the issue number, or Avengers, but the one that stuck out was X-Men. It's that Paul Smith cover. But I think a lot of people relate to X-Men because or at least maybe it's my generation. We felt like we were the loners. We were like, we were the ones that read comics and nobody else was reading. So we felt special. So we felt like the outsiders. I think a lot of people relate to that. Like, whether you come from another country and you can't speak the language, I have a lot of gay friends that are huge X-Men fans because of the way that, the stories touch them. Oh, these people aren't accepted in society, so I see a lot of myself in that. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that goes to minorities, whatever it is, we see ourselves in these stories, and that's what we gravitate towards, and that's what we aspire to be. So for me, probably has a lot to do with that. Kid didn't know English, felt like an outsider. Sure, X-Men makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that's 100%. I can see that. And like you said, with minorities, I remember growing up, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of like the stand-in for segregation, for racial violence and things like that. And just, someone is different than you. Someone is a mutant, and you're judging them because they're different than you. And then later on, I think that's when I started to see more homosexuality and the relation there. And now I think even transgender, and like, X-Men has evolved so much, and tied to so many different outcasts, like you said. So I got to give them credit. And just even Stanley and Jack Kirby and all the original X-Men guys, and Chris Claremont, the people who also pushed it forward, just recognizing and creating those characters.
Yes. So a lot of it has to do with, Chris Claremont, right? I mean, to a lot of people, Chris Claremont is X-Men. But, there's also Ann Nocenti and Louise Simonson were the editors at the time, uh, pushing for some of these things and even approving some of these stories. It's crazy to think about. Like, my favorite story is God Loves, Man Kills, right? A group of humans that are super Christian, like a televangelist, is hunting down mutants. Chris Claremont got so many death threats because of that. Like back then, like a televangelist is going around and killing these people that are not accepted by society. That speaks volumes of like where we are now compared to then, right? Like they were trying to push for things then. Now it's, you kind of see that story just about everywhere. But back then it was almost near impossible to get that approved. To this day, I don't even know how some of that stuff in God Loves, Man Kills, how the editors were like, yeah, okay. I mean, there were things in there that there is no way they can do now. And that's, to this day, it's still my favorite story because it really touches on everything that I love about that group of characters.
Nice. Well, I know what the thumbnail is going to be for this episode. We're going to have that specific cover, but yeah, I think that, like you said, everything you said is 100% relatable, and I think the X-Men, just the idea of the X-Men, has had such a lasting impact, and that's what I love about a lot of the characters from this, that were created in the '60s, and they're still relevant in 2023. Just
Mhm.
all the flexibility of the characters to morph into the current generations, and being able to take something from, I guess, being able to adapt, I should say, because even Peter Parker, the idea of Peter Parker in the '60s is not necessarily the Peter Parker now, but he still has those roots in his original creation, and it's just timeless. I think a lot of these characters are something that we're gonna. And actually, you mentioned Grant Morrison. I love what he said in his book Super Gods. He was talking about
So
how
good.
the idea of Superman is more powerful and more real than he is. That Superman has been around before he was born. Superman will be around after he's gone. And I love that idea of these creations living on past us, being passed down from generation to generation, and just the, like I said, the flexibility of each one of these, the ideas of them, and just blows my mind. Super Gods, and thinking about that. But yeah, that's, I don't have a question. I just want to, like,
No,
that
no,
was
you're
specifically
you're
what I like.
you, you mentioning Silver Age. I mean, that's what attracted people to Marvel Comics as opposed to DC, was the relatable
Mm,
characters. The
yes.
skinny guy that gets picked on. That was a superhero. That was his alter ego, right? I mean, before we had Billy Batson through Fawcett Comics and Captain Marvel, but Superman's alter ego was Clark Kent. You still couldn't throw a punch at Clark Kent without breaking your hand, right?
Yeah.
So I thought it was really cool that when you mentioned that, one of my favorite things I have on my channel is a segment called where my family reviews things. So it's my
Oh.
two daughters and my wife and I, and it's the first time reading, and we're going through a series of Silver Age books, and one of them is my favorite thing that I didn't even notice, but my oldest daughter noticed this, and we were reviewing Mighty Marvel Masterworks Spider-Man Volume 1, and it's pretty much the first Amazing Fantasy 15 and like the first 9 issues of Spider-Man. And she was like, she looked at the camera, she's like, now you have to understand, this was written in the '60s, so it was before integration. So there's only white people in the school. And I was like, I I, I never noticed this.
That's
She was
amazing.
like teaching people a lesson before you
Yes.
try to say what's going on. Like, it was 1961.
Ah,
And I'm like, man, I didn't even think, because, I read that when I was her age, reading a reprint. I just didn't even think about those things. So it's funny
same.
to, like, going back to the Silver Age and reading those with my daughters, what they catch and what I didn't catch.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. And I love that your family is involved. That's also something that when I met my wife, one of the first questions I asked her when were dating was, would you ever consider reading a comic book? And then she was like, yeah. And I gave her Fables. That was like the first
Yeah, it's a
comic
good
that I
one. It's a
gave
good
her.
one.
But my son is still a little too young, but he's wearing
Yeah,
all the Marvel and DC
yeah.
stuff.
He's representing. He's
Yeah,
representing.
just hoping by osmosis that he will have a love for it. But um, it's interesting that, and now sorry, my train of thought
It's
completely
okay.
ran off because I was thinking about my son. Um, I I really like that currently a lot of the characters are they're they're what you would see today. They're more representative of society today. I mean, you can even look at the that Black Adam movie that just came out, where you have all different. It's not all one race. It's not just white from
Hmm.
start to finish. Like the whole lineup is diverse, and you're seeing that throughout all the different properties now, and it's so interesting the way that the writers are. They have the ability to actually create more modern stories and more inclusive stories that everyone is involved, from whether it's, like I said, different sexualities, different races, different religions. Like I really am happy where we're at right now in comics, and
Hmm.
I hope it just continues to evolve and grow. And so my son, who is my wife is Latina, so, and my son, I always call him Miles Morales because I'm like, all right, you're gonna
Oh
be
yeah.
part black, you're gonna be part Latino. So that's that character means a lot to me. And so,
Mhm.
like when I watched Across the Spider Verse and or into the Spider Verse, sorry,
Yeah,
Across the
yeah.
Spider Verse coming up. But when I watch that and when I think about that character, like it means so much to me now, even more because of my son.
Hmm.
And it's like that's what I love about comics also, is these characters can can feel real to us and have a place in our hearts that like we know them and like they're real
Hmm.
in that sense. So I love the idea of enjoying these properties so much that they feel real to us. So I'm really happy that you have your family involved. And
Oh, thanks, man.
yeah,
It's been a blessing. I'm gonna share a story with you that I
yeah.
think you'll appreciate. Not at first, maybe, but you'll appreciate. So I grew up in the '80s, and I was reading comic books like most some of my friends. In the '80s, we didn't have a lot of what we have now, which is diversity, right?
Mm,
There weren't a lot of characters that look like me. There weren't a lot of characters that look like you. It was mainly white male characters. So I didn't like the Living Lightning, and I think he was the only Latino in the Avengers. And I'm like, I like the Black Knight. You know what? Black Knight's my dude. Like, so characters to me growing up didn't have to look like me in order for me to like them. Like
hmm
Wolverine's my guy,
hmm
Nightwing,
yeah, yeah.
Uncle
Oh,
Scrooge,
man.
Storm. Like I love, like I relate to those characters.
Yeah.
Chris Claremont was way ahead of his time with the characters there in X-Men. And so when people on my channel, like when we talk and we do live streams, people are like, I think it's wonderful, representation matters. And then there's other people that are like, well, no, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Characters shouldn't have to look like you. So I come from that mentality, but I'm going to tell you something that changed my mind in the way that I thought. Like, I never thought like, okay, it doesn't matter to me, it should not matter to you. I'm never like
Right,
that. If it
right,
matters to you, then that's beautiful,
right.
and you own that, and that's wonderful. I was watching Into the Spider Verse. I went to the movie theater to watch that, right? And there was a little kid there, little kid who was mixed. And dude, at the end of the movie, he looked at that screen. He goes, "Daddy, he looks just like me," and I about cried. I was like, "Who am I to crap on that little dude?" Like maybe I'm just jealous. Maybe back in my day we had you know we didn't have anybody like we didn't have that. And now kids do, and I think that's wonderful. Because a lot of people forget that some of these kids don't have people to look up to, and sometimes fictional characters are what we have to look up to and what we have to try to aspire to be.
Yeah.
So if they look like you, cool, man. That's wonderful. Yeah, man. Now it's like I see so many Latinos and all these kids. I'm like,
Yeah.
man, back in my day, we did that. Where you choose from? Sunspot, and the Brazilians claimed him.
Yeah.
He didn't even speak Spanish.
Yeah, that's 100%. Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm not too far behind you. And growing up, it was always like I think I'm very similar to you, where I didn't see that it was all just white, and
Mhm.
it was like, oh, these are just stories, and this
Right,
is
because
just
they were
what's happening.
characters, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I have that same kind of mentality where to me it doesn't matter, but I've gotten recently a lot of comments on my YouTube where people are just like, "Oh, well, the characters was always white, so they should always stay white," and even to the point where it was like Rogue and Kiki
Oh,
Palmer.
I saw
She
that.
was
That's
like
good.
she wanted to kind of fan casting, and she took it, and people were like, I wasn't even thinking about it in those terms. I was just like, oh yeah, she's a good actress, and let's see what she can do if they were to cast her. It wasn't even official news, but people were like, no, she's terrible. She shouldn't be Rogue. And I was like, what about the character of Rogue is specifically saying she has to be a white female? Like, there's nothing
Mhm.
from her background. Like, it's not like T'Challa and Black Panther, and like, okay, you have to be from Africa. Like, there's a meaning to Black Panther being African, but
I I will I try to stay away from those discussions because that is a rabbit hole of just
right.
oof. I've seen a lot of discussions, and I have friends that get in the middle of them, and more power and more love and energy to those people that can do that, because I don't have the energy to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I just I saw a lot of hate towards like the Little Mermaid, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's another one. Yep.
That was the big one, and
Yeah.
in my head, the only thing I can think about is where the hell were all these people when Michael Bay was making Transformers, and none of them
Right.
Transformers looked like the
Right.
Transformers I grew up with.
Right.
We didn't throw a fit like that. Where were you all at?
Yeah. Yeah.
Y'all wait till now to talk about what your childhood's being crapped on?
Yeah.
Nah.
I wonder if it's like this is also fascinating to me, like the people online feeling like they're anonymous and like, oh, okay, I can say whatever. They
Oh, I'm
would have,
sure a lot of it has to do with that. Yeah.
yeah, they would have said that back in the 80s or 90s, but they just didn't have this forum and this platform now. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's a very good point about Transformers. I wonder.
Just where were those people, man?
Yeah.
You gotta be
Right.
angry about something, be angry about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And are you really the target audience for like I didn't know the people that cared about the Little Mermaid that much until my brothers were
I'm,
showing me some of the feed or some of the comments, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know the Little Mermaid had a fan following like
yeah.
that.
I'm
Okay.
I'm the same way. I had no clue or no identity or no understanding of that. But yeah, I like that that these type of things exist now where it can be diverse, and like you said, children can look up and see themselves on this big screen or in the comics or in the books, and that's just something that representation matters 100%, where I've experienced it, and like I can say 100% that when you see yourself in these forms or these formats, it definitely does matter, because I think I never want children to get the impression that they're not good enough because they don't look like the person on the screen. Oh, my hair
Hmm.
should be different texture. I should look differently because that's what I'm seeing all the time, 24/7. It's like, nonstop. This is the image and the what's just in front of me. So I'm glad that there's that aspect of it as well, where oh, my culture is not bad. If I bring my culture's food to school and it smells different than everybody else's, I'm not the weirdo. I'm not the
That's why I
bad
used to get
person.
in fights when I went to Catholic school.
Yeah. So
These punks was looking at my lunch a little different, man. You get whacked in the back of the head.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will say something though. Like I think sometimes when things like that are expressed, sometimes people are genuinely in love with the character. So like
Hmm.
somebody,
Hmm.
I mean, if Rogue is their character and their Rogue's always been a white girl, then I can
Right.
understand that, right?
Right.
But I think there are some people that just take it to the extreme, just like well, that can go
everything.
either way, though.
Yeah,
But
right.
I do think like sometimes a character means so much to you
Mhm.
that like Namor's not one of my favorite characters. So when they changed him into a Latino dude, like sure, whatever. Then I think about, okay, well, what happened if they did that to Wolverine? I'm like, well, then I might be like, well, man, it's a little different now. Like, you know
Right,
what I'm saying? Like we all
right,
have our own special characters
right.
that we like, and we want them to remain as true to the source material as much as possible. I mean, for the same way that I don't know why they changed what's her name and Ghost in the Shell, the live action movie,
Oh yeah,
to be
Scarlett. Yeah, Scarlett
Scarlett
Johansson.
Johansson, right?
Yeah,
Like I thought, why didn't they just cast somebody to be Captain
right.
Katsuragi? Like that
Yeah,
made no sense at all. So
right. Well, and
because
that's what I'm saying of like characters that are from a certain country. It doesn't make sense. Like Wolverine is Canadian. Like there's now you can have, let's say, like the Indian Spider-Man. Like you can have different realities and different Earths, and you have different
mm,
dimensions, whatever. And you're placing that character in a different lens, and you're placing him in a different, you know, it comes from a different culture and background. That's fine, and you still have the original. And that's another thing. It's like these people that are complaining. It's like, okay, all the books that you read when you were growing up are still there. They haven't been erased, or whatever you latched onto as a child is still there. Here's something new. Here's something different. We have that changes all the time. You know.
yeah, and I think that's why with movies I'm okay with
Hmm.
changes
Hmm.
anyway, because they've changed things
Oh
already,
yeah, there's like
and it's not
ton of
like I'm
stuff.
gonna see a true to the source material movie adaptation of anything.
Right.
So I'm okay with whatever. I still have my comics if I want to go back
Yes.
to comics.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, I'm with that. But that's like anything though. That's like with book adaptations,
Right.
video game adaptations.
Right.
I can always go back to the original thing,
Yes.
and I don't have to enjoy it just because something new is coming, and it's not going to replace my love and joy for something else.
That's 100%. Well, I want to say that I have love and joy for Near Mint Condition. I am so glad that you joined me on this episode of the Comic Book Kaiju. I'm going to have all of the links in the show notes. I want everybody who is listening or watching this on YouTube, head over to the Patreon, the merch, get all of the Near Mint Condition stuff. I think having a positive comic book community is always something that I'm for. So I've seen the Minties, I've seen your community, and it's also something that I aspire to. There's many things that you have, the level that you've set, the bar that you've set. I'm trying to get to. So I'm very happy, and joyous that you've joined me on this episode. So thank you very much.
It was my pleasure, and you just let me know if you ever need to have me on again. I'd be more than happy to.
Yes, 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 a hundred
It was a
percent.
lot of fun. It was a lot of fun talking to you about these things.
Yes. You have a open invitation. Want to let everybody know that our January book of the month that we're doing is Far Sector, the Green Lantern book by N.K. Jemisin and Jamal Campbell. You can head over to wherever you get your comics, check out Far Sector, and come back to the Comic Book Kaiju, where we will be having a full on discussion. So that is coming down the pipe. Just want to let everybody know. But like I said, all of the great stuff, you're going to want to head over to Near Mint Condition. Check out Uncanny Omar. Everything that he's doing over there is fantastic. Him and his family, I want to say 100%. I love everything they're doing. And I love comics. Uncanny Omar loves comics. And you should too.